I know that this is a bold claim, but I'm willing to bet that most people watching this right now are making at least one of the mistakes I'm going to talk about in this video. All of these errors have two things in common. Firstly, they are all frequently made on payload maps, and second, they are related to map control. Map control, also referred to as space or room, is what wins games. I'll repeat that because it is really, really important. Map control wins games. This is true for all objective types, but the focus for this video is on payload. In order to win as the blue team, you have to push the cart to the end of the track. You must stand near the cart without dying to do this, but killing unprotected players on the cart is a pretty trivial task for the defending team. Therefore, in order to win the game, you must make enough space in front of the objective to prevent red from simply killing your pushers. Similarly, as red, you must prevent the cart from moving to the end of the track, which also requires you to control the parts of the map that the cart travels through. If you can defend these areas and stop the cart until the round timer runs out, you win. This is a very simplified way of explaining map control because the means of achieving this are varied and nuanced. However, it is essential that you understand that controlling space leads to winning games. Anyways, that is enough theory for now. Let me get into the mistakes that I see players making. The first, most common, and most obvious mistake blue players make is congregating on the cart. To many newer players, it seems like the correct way to play the objective is to, well, put as many people onto the objective as possible. I'm sure you've also seen this in your games many times. Blue team loves to put an unnecessary amount of people onto the cart when they have a lot of momentum. If you didn't know, the maximum cap rate of the payload cart is ×3, so it is pointless to put more players onto the objective to get a larger multiplier. I myself am guilty of this error sometimes as well, although the main reason I push the cart in casual is to get my easy +2 points as the payload is about to reach a capture point. Objectively speaking, I shouldn't do this, and the reason is because of map control. Ideally, you want to have the front line be in front of the cart to make space for your cart pushers to cap. Players who are forward in front of the cart should be killing any red players who dare attempt to contest the all-important payload. Classes like Demo and Soldier are better suited to holding doorways to either kill the defenders attempting to stop the payload or force them to back up enough that they don't threaten the cart pushers. Obviously, not every class should be trying to push up in front of the cart, since you do need some people standing on the payload, but the general idea is you want the payload and its pushers to be out of harm's way. In fact, depending on the situation, even if you lose the team fight, because the fight was taking place further forward than the objective, sometimes you will be able to still capture a point despite losing the deathmatch. This is why I stated in the intro that map control wins games. Technically, all you have to do is capture the objective, so even if you all die in the process, the game doesn't care. Knowing whether you should be getting aggressive or be in one of your team's dedicated cart pushers is mostly up to your own intuition. Some classes are better suited to pushing, such as Scout, Engineer, and Pyro. Scout because he gets ×2 capture rate, Engineer because he can regen his metal and or spam short circuit if you are evil, as well as because Engineer isn't exactly a frontline class generally speaking, and Pyro because he can airblast spam and check for spies, which are both common ways that cart pushers end up dying. Heavy can also be a decent cart pusher because he is slow and he can use the cart as a head glitch in a pinch. The Fists of Steel are also very good for sponging damage in an attempt to cheese out the cap if the defenders have won a teamfight and are collapsing on the cart. Personally, I almost never push the cart regardless of what class I'm playing, because there is typically an abundance of players on my team who love to AFK on the payload, so I leave that up to them and focus on making enough space for my team to win. Also, it's just way more fun to push forward than it is to sit on the cart. So if putting too many players on the objective is a mistake people make on blue team, what about red? There are two common mistakes I see red players making on payload, but before I get to those, I need to point out some more payload theory. I would argue that defense is actually harder than offense on payload because, despite being provided better positioning, red spawns are typically much longer. This weakness is further exemplified by the many points that have an extremely long walk from spawn to the front line, meaning that a defending team is very reliant on teleporters. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself mentioning tellies. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is that the defending team is incentivized by the game mode to play, well, defensively. That being said, a very common mistake I see in payload is a complete lack of aggression from red. Obviously, you want to avoid dying for the aforementioned reasons, but sometimes offense is the best defense. If blue is down a lot of players, or if they're in a bad spot, or you have some other advantage such as an Uber advantage, better team composition, or just a straight up better group of players, then pushing into blue and taking more map control can be the right play. On occasion, blue team might wipe, but red team still has most of their players alive. Depending on the situation, it can be very strong to actually move the defense up a point. Swiftwater Last and Badwater Last are good examples of this because as long as the cart isn't super close to being capped, there isn't much of a downside to moving that gear up and forcing blue to break a forward hold before they are even able to start pushing to the last point. The downside to moving into a forward hold on last, or in any situation really, is the possibility of your team failing the transition or the hold and bleeding so many players that you aren't able to set back up and you subsequently lose the round. This segues into my second point about defense. Many players are not good at recognizing a lost cause and giving up a point. I've said before that on payload, red needs to win every single team fight to successfully defend a point, and blue just has to win one to cap. This is true in theory, but it is ignoring a few nitty-gritty details. Firstly, giving up a point is often a better option than fighting to the bloody end, because if your team wipes, blue will have a lot of momentum to carry them into the next point. If the offense follows the advice I gave them earlier in this video and takes the map control they are given, red is unlikely to have any defense at all on the next point, essentially losing 2 points in one. It isn't uncommon for this momentum to carry beyond the next point, into third, and even last in some games. Instead, it is almost always better for the red team to realize they will likely lose the team fight and just book it. Obviously this isn't an option on the last point since there are no more points to defend. Or is it? Well, another flaw with my red always has to win every team fight to hard hold a point anecdote is it entirely ignores refights. If the defending team leaves a point, as long as blue's cart isn't too close to capping, they have an opportunity to push back into the point and get a defense set back up. The difficulty of this will depend on the map, but generally speaking it is harder to pull off than attacking as the blue team because dying is more punishing as red. That being said, refighting a point is extremely rewarding when done correctly. Speaking of doing it correctly, there are a few things defenders must do for a good refight. First and most important is to wait for any dead players to be spawned and ready to go. Secondly, red team should commit together as a team. Now, in casual, for all of these things to happen is extremely wishful thinking, but the nice thing is that refighting can be less clean and coordinated because the other team also lacks coordination. In pubs, I've seen successful refights from porch on upward second with no apartments control or split pressure from tracks. This is an objectively terrible push, but it goes to show that sometimes simply the act of refighting is a big enough surprise to thwart the offense. Oh right, I haven't explained split pressure yet. I just want to briefly mention here that if blue has too much cart time, or red's respawners are going to be too far away to make it to the fight in time, the better option for red is to simply regroup on the next point. This is the less exciting and less rewarding option, but it is better to get set up on the next point than to fail a refight for previously mentioned reasons, so you should only recommit to a point if you think you have a high chance of winning. So, other than stacking way too many players on the payload, being too passive on defense, and overcommitting to unwinnable defenses, what other mistakes are there? While this section is dedicated to general malpractice that isn't unique to offense or defense, or even the payload game mode specifically, although I think they are extra important on most payload maps. First is the aforementioned split pressure. This is arguably more important for blue, but red should keep this in mind for their defense as well as any attempted refights, which are essentially a mini offense. I could ramble on about split pressure for a while, probably enough to make a separate video about it, so I'll try and keep this relatively short. Positioning is important in TF2, and choke points are a major factor. When pushing, getting through a choke point is typically the most dangerous part of the push, and it is not a good idea to have all 12 of your players pushing the same choke point because classes like Demo will blow you up. Instead, you want your push to be from multiple angles simultaneously in order to divide the defense's attention. One example is sending some players up main on upward third, while others split off and go through U-turn, while at the same time getting players onto the cart. If blue can successfully take control of the platform and U-turn and get someone on the cart at the same time, red is left in a difficult spot. They can't comfortably sit back and spam the cart because of the pressure from U-turn and main, but they also can't easily push forward because of the risk of getting pinched from the U-turn players while they are fighting the main players. Ideally, blue would have a sniper on the catwalk or behind the cart on roller coaster, and maybe a heavy or soldier pushing the flank house, but in casual, the small details aren't what's important. only that your team isn't all funneling through one choke point. This last mistake is one that I see all the time, and unlike many other errors I've talked about so far that result in a swift demise, this one is slow and insidious. Ignoring teleporters. Now, this isn't an issue that is unique to payload, and it is quite map dependent. In fact, the importance of killing a teleporter varies from point to point as well. As a rule of thumb, if there is a lot of distance between the spawn and the front line, a teleporter pick is extremely valuable. Badwater comes to mind when I think of teleporters winning games. A tele pick for blue team pushing first is extremely important. Killing a tele that red has set up on the roof when you are pushing second is also important, and keeping your teleporter alive when pushing third is almost essential because of how far you have to walk from your own spawn. Hopefully this Badwater example makes it clear that teleporters can make or break a game for both red and blue. So if you see a lot of opponents with teleporter particles, try and find an opportunity to take that tele out. If you apply the main advice of this video by getting aggressive when your team has a lot of kills, you should have no trouble getting those teleporter picks. That is all I have to say for now. Hopefully this video was helpful to you in some way. Thank you for watching. What the fuck? I'm stuck!